I knew something was off the second Damien raised his champagne flute at the New Year's party and toasted to a year of clean slates and tighter ships. The way he said it, eyes flicking toward me like I was a forgotten relic from the past fiscal quarter, I knew. That wasn't a celebration, that was a warning. He gave me a wink, like I was supposed to be in on the joke, and turned back to the group of fresh-faced directors, none of whom had ever logged a midnight escalation call or hand-audited a failover sequence at 3 a.m. with a flashlight and a caffeine IV. My name wasn't on the annual reports. But the infrastructure? That was mine. The security model that stopped the ex-CTO's insider trading attempt? Mine. The vendor vetting algorithm that flagged our biggest competitor's shell corp? Also mine. Every single system they relied on to look like a smooth, modern powerhouse was balanced on code. I handwrote between crisis calls and boardroom emergencies no one remembered 2 weeks later. 14 years. That's what I gave Solix Dynamics. 14 years of loyalty, of silence, of solving every ticking time bomb before it reached the executive floor. And all I got in return was a 5-minute phone call from Nicholas at 8:12 a.m. on January 1st, telling me, Damien's taking over operations. You'll support him. No warning, no discussion. Just a new world order where pedigree and pageantry replaced systems and stewardship. Before we dive deeper, real quick, if you're listening to this and you appreciate stories where the underdog doesn't go quietly, where technical brilliance still counts for something, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It keeps this whole thing alive, and honestly, it tells the algorithm not to overlook you either. Back to Damien. Let me tell you who he is. 2 years ago, he was an intern with a Stanford lanyard and a LinkedIn smile. Got fast-tracked because his father golfs with Nicholas. Sat in on strategy calls, took bad notes, made jokes about how back-end ops people are like janitors. Important, but not client-facing. The kind of guy who reads half a McKinsey deck and suddenly thinks he invented cloud orchestration. When he reappeared this December, it was with a new title, VP of Operations. He didn't even bother to shake my hand. I'm sure you'll have tons to teach me, he said, grinning. But I'm a quick learner. Just need the keys in a week. I smiled right back, not because I agreed, but because I already knew he'd trip the wire. You see, 8 years ago, when Nicholas and I were trying to prevent a cross-region cascade failure during a vendor merger, I quietly proposed a clause, a buried line inside the root credential protocol, Clause 18C, Legacy Infrastructure Custodian Hold. It was tucked between harmless-sounding redundancies. Nicholas signed it during one of those 2 a.m. incident postmortems. It gave exactly one person, a designated legacy custodian, the ability to enforce a master systems hold in the event of unauthorized operational transfer. In plain English, if you try to push me out without board ratification, everything stops. No one remembered it, but I never forgot. When Damien told me at the party that I'd be training him starting Monday, I didn't argue. I just nodded, clinked glasses, and watched his reflection in the ice bucket as he walked away like he owned the place. He thought I was just another mid-level dinosaur clinging to old processes. I was the firewall, and he was about to slam into me. I spent that weekend organizing my own files. Not Solix files, my files, legal backups, licensing trails, custodial logs, time-stamped receipts of every structural change I'd ever logged, every risk exception I'd ever mitigated on their behalf without asking for a raise or recognition. You don't survive 14 years in back-end ops without understanding one truth. Praise is optional. Proof is not. Monday morning, I wore black. Not as a statement, just practical. I knew where this was headed. The email came at 8:47 a.m. from Damien's assistant. Please join Damien in the executive lounge for a role transition sync. Sync. Cute word for a termination. I didn't flinch. I just zipped my laptop bag, picked up a manila envelope, and walked into the lounge like I'd been invited to give a keynote. Damien was there already, leaning back in a Solix-branded bomber jacket like he'd been born in it. Let's make this clean, he said, sliding a glossy packet toward me. No hard feelings. I smiled gently and said, Of course. Then I handed the envelope to the compliance officer seated to his left. Not Damien. The officer opened it, read the first page, blinked twice. Clause 18C. he muttered. His voice had that glassy, slow-motion cadence you only hear right before everything hits the fan. His eyes cut to Damien. "We have a problem," he said. Damien strutted in on January 2nd like he'd just walked off a TED Talk stage. Black turtleneck, Apple Watch, enough cologne to fumigate a server farm. "This place is ripe for a refresh," he said in his first all-hands meeting, standing under the Solix mission banner like he was Moses delivering tablets from Bain and Company. Simplify, streamline, disrupt. I watched from the back row, sipping burnt coffee. He talked about cutting legacy bloat, called back-end ops invisible sandbags. Laughed when someone brought up systems redundancy. "We don't need 3 fail-safes. We need 1 strong one." That sentence alone sent 3 engineers into Slack spirals. The next day, his consulting firm arrived. 4 guys in matching blazers who treated production like a PowerPoint. They started mapping out improvements using words like agile rebalance, core architecture democratization, and my personal favorite, eliminating tribal bottlenecks. I was the tribe, which meant I was the bottleneck. Which meant, in their words, I was an elegant artifact of a previous operating paradigm. First, they disabled rollback checkpoints. Too many logs slows response time. Then, they killed version control in the middle of an update cycle. We're streamlining. I filed incident reports. I logged irregular access events. I sent escalation emails. Quietly, professionally, with detailed annotations. No one responded. By Friday, we had 4 active audit flags, security compliance, credential exposure, vendor escalation, and 1 cheerful ping from our EU privacy node wondering why their data sovereignty anchor was now unresolvable. I kept printing reports, highlighted gaps, time-stamped changes, filed everything to Mariner Frameworks, my personal LLC created back when Nicholas first hinted at expanding to international data markets. I'd set it up to legally house overflow logs, third-party compliance mirrors, and, crucially, secondary copies of architectural ownership clauses. Because I knew this day would come. I knew they'd forget. The real kicker came Monday morning. Damien called me into his office and said, "We've done a capability mapping. Your responsibilities are increasingly automated." His mouth curled in that smug, progressive way people do when they've read 1 too many Harvard Business Review articles. "You're saying I'm redundant." "I'm saying the system is evolving beyond the need for embedded stewards." Embedded steward. That was his word for someone who kept his shiny toy from exploding every time he pushed a button he didn't understand. "Just to clarify," I said, "you're suggesting a system without a steward manages itself." He nodded. "With the right tooling, yes." I wanted to laugh, but instead I nodded, jotted down his phrasing on a notepad like I was going to meditate on it later. "Thanks for the clarity," I said. "I'll make sure the handoff is smooth." He relaxed. Thought he'd won. That's the thing about guys like Damien. They mistake quiet for compliance. He never asked about the root credentials, never even asked how superuser escalation worked, because some fresh-faced consultant told him the system was containerized now, and he took that to mean disaster-proof. What he didn't know, what Nicholas himself had signed 8 years ago during a caffeine-fueled infrastructure panic, was Clause 18C, buried in the operational charter, nested in the heart of the trust framework, a hold trigger tied directly to legacy custodian dismissal. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't theoretical. It was a kill switch. If the listed custodian, me, was removed without board approval, the override activated. No dashboard access, no credential validation, no quorum authorization. Root escalation would default to frozen state. All governance actions would halt, permanently, unless 2 keys reversed it. Mine and the board's. I'd written the clause. Nicholas had read it, twice, and signed it. The consultants hadn't read a single operational charter. Damien hadn't read past the first page. HR had no clue the termination flow they were so excited to trigger was linked to core systems trust elevation. And IT, they assumed everything would just work. I walked out of his office, logged into my admin terminal, and opened the silent trigger node. It blinked yellow, dormant, waiting. In the background, the consulting firm was deploying an update they didn't understand to a security framework they thought was decorative. Damien sent an email. Legacy protocols will be deprecated by EOD Wednesday. I didn't respond, but Clause 18C did. It was the smile that did it. That smug, glossy-lipped, post-champagne smirk Damien wore when I walked into the executive lounge at exactly 9 a.m., like he was about to close a merger, not push a woman out the door who built the company's skeleton by hand. The room smelled like citrus polish and new leather. They'd redone it over the holidays. Fresh carpet, modern lighting, minimalist art on the walls, all curated to look sleek and visionary. Funny. They scrubbed the walls but left the rot inside. Damien lounged at the far end of the conference table, draped in a branded Solex bomber jacket 2 sizes too tight, like a startup CEO cosplaying as operations lead. Next to him, Tessa from compliance, looking uncomfortable already, and a clipboard-holding HR manager whose name I'd never bothered to learn because she still pronounced sass like sass. "Thanks for coming in," Damien said, gesturing like I had a choice. His voice was coated in that faux kindness HR departments seem to inject into their own bloodstreams. He pushed a glossy folder toward me across the table. "Let's make this clean. Transition plan, NDA, severance summary. No hard feelings, yeah?" "No hard feelings." I took a breath. Set my laptop bag gently on the chair beside me. Looked down at the folder like it was a foreign object, something vaguely radioactive. Then I looked up at Damien and gave him the calmest smile I've ever worn in my life. "No hard feelings," I echoed. And then I reached into my bag, not for my laptop, not for my resignation letter, not even for my phone, but for a slim cream envelope. Unmarked. Crisp. I didn't hand it to Damien, I handed it to Tessa. She blinked, caught off guard, then took it with both hands like it might bite. She broke the seal, slid the document out. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, then they stopped. Her fingers curled a little around the page. She read slower, then faster. Then she stopped entirely. And when she looked up, the blood had drained from her face. "Clause 18C," she said softly. Damien straightened in his chair, that smirk twitching at the edges. "What?" Tessa didn't answer him. She was still looking at me, not angry, not confused, just stunned, like she just realized the floor was made of ice and it was starting to crack. "Clause 18C," she repeated, this time louder. "The Legacy Infrastructure Custodian Hold Clause." "What are you talking about?" Damien asked, voice tightening. "That's just historical. The new system overrides all that." "No," Tessa cut in, sharper than I'd ever heard her. "It doesn't. It's tied to the operational charter. It's foundational." She flipped the paper around and pointed. "This isn't just about credentials. This is about governance hierarchy. The clause triggers a root-level override if the custodian is removed without board authorization." "That custodian," she added, nodding toward me, "is her." I didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched the realization settle on Damien's shoulders like bricks. He looked at the HR manager, then back at Tessa. "Wait, are you saying she can just block us?" "No," Tessa said. "I'm saying she already did." Right on cue, Damien's tablet buzzed. He tapped it. Nothing. He frowned, tried again. Still nothing. I knew what he was seeing. A red error banner that read, "Root path compromised, privileged access restricted per clause, 18C. That was the default language. I'd written it myself. He stood up, slamming the tablet onto the table. "What the hell is this?" "You tried to fire a systems custodian without board quorum," I said quietly, which, if you'd read past the first page of the transition policy, violates the operational governance charter Nicholas signed in 2016, twice, during an incident postmortem, with legal present. "This is insane. That clause was never meant to be enforced." I finished for him. "Only by people arrogant enough to ignore it." He opened his mouth, then closed it. In the hallway, security was still waiting. One of them checked his watch. "Technically," I continued, "my termination hasn't been authorized, and until that changes, my credential is active, which means every core system trusts me, not you." Tessa was already pulling out her phone, probably to call legal. Damien looked around the room like he could reverse this with pure volume. "You're trying to sabotage this company." "No," I said, "I'm protecting it. From you." He looked like he might throw the tablet. Instead, he sank slowly back into his chair. I slid the glossy folder back across the table. "Let's make this clean," I said. "No hard feelings." The first laugh was fake. Too loud. The kind of laugh someone gives when they think the joke's still theirs. Damien looked at the frozen compliance officer, then at me, then back to the tablet in his hand like he could manually will it into obedience. "Okay," he said, dragging out the syllable. "You got your moment. Funny. Haha. Now let's get back to..." The tablet buzzed, then the screen dimmed, then flashed red. "Access error." His smirk twitched. He tapped the screen again, faster this time, swiped, pinched, double-tapped like someone fighting a pop-up ad on a motel Wi-Fi. Another alert slid in across the top. Dashboard. Failover blocked. Clause. 18C protection engaged. He blinked. "What the hell is this?" The compliance officer didn't answer. She was already typing, fast. Her own terminal beeped 3 times, each more frantic than the last. Across the lounge, the HR rep's phone vibrated with a push alert from the internal broadcast node. She glanced down, confused, then paled. "Why is the Q1 deck access locked?" "Because the system didn't believe they were in charge anymore." Damien stood up, waving his tablet like a limp sword. "This is a technical error. She's exaggerating. We migrated governance last quarter." "You thought you did," I said calmly. "But you didn't understand what you were migrating." He stormed around the table, jabbing at his tablet. "We brought in a consultant team to review all access protocols." "They reviewed the visible stack," I said. "They never touched the trust layer." That stopped him cold. Because even he knew what the trust layer was. The part of the architecture that couldn't be containerized or templatized or smoothed into some Deloitte buzzword. It was written in line with Solix's founding operational charter. It was the thing that determined who the system trusted, not who had a title, not who wore the bomber jacket, who the system recognized. Clause 18C, I said, turning slightly toward the HR manager who was now frantically texting someone, "isn't decorative. It's a master hold. Any attempt to remove or restrict the custodian credential without board ratification triggers a fail-safe." "Fail-safe?" Damien echoed like he was chewing glass. "Fail-safe from what?" "From hostile transitions," I said, finally looking him in the eye. "From moments like this." He spun back to Tessa. "Can't you override this?" Tessa didn't answer right away. She was reading her screen, line by line. Her eyes moved like she was watching a slow-motion car crash. Then, quietly, she shook her head. "The override requires dual key authorization, one from the board, one from the custodian." His face twisted. "You mean her?" "That's what it says," she replied. Behind her, another screen blinked. Internal comms had begun locking out privileged accounts. Board packet previews, pre-scheduled investor call decks, cross-region deployment tools. Everything that required root verification now returned the same message. Authority lock engaged. Contact custodian. And the custodian was still sitting calmly across the table. "I'll call Nicholas," Damien barked. "You're welcome to," I said. "He knows the clause. He signed it. Twice." Damien hesitated mid-dial. "During a security incident in 2016, I continued. And again, when we added multi-tenant microservice layers in 2018, I asked for the clause as part of protocol stabilization. He agreed it was necessary, because we both knew something like this might happen one day." He lowered the phone. I watched him go through the 5 stages of corporate grief right in front of me. Denial, anger, bargaining, confusion, and finally, disbelief. Security entered the lounge a minute later, eyes wide, holding radios they weren't even pretending to use. "We've got a system-wide access cascade," one of them said quietly. "Privileged doors, too." Damien didn't speak. Couldn't. Because for the first time since he slid that folder across the table, he understood what was actually happening. The system didn't belong to him. It didn't even recognize him. Solix's digital DNA, the infrastructure that ran every secure function, from executive dashboards to quarterly forecasting to boardroom quorum validation, wasn't just hardened. It was loyal to one credential, mine. So when he tried to cut me out, it did exactly what I told it to do. It stopped trusting him. And until I said otherwise, it would stay that way. By 9:43 a.m., The word glitch had been retired. The first thing they tried was the emergency override, compliance's go-to panic button meant for real-time system bugs or accidental lockouts. Tessa leaned over her console and typed in the master bypass string like she was defusing a bomb. She hit enter. Nothing happened. Then the screen blinked back. Override denied. Custodian, hold active. Dual key authorization required. Damien was pacing now, snapping at people, trying to make volume compensate for credibility. Just shut it down and reboot it from root, he shouted at the lead sysadmin, who looked like he regretted taking this job more than he regretted his first tattoo. You can't reboot trust architecture, I said from my chair. Damien ignored me, or pretended to. Tessa looked up, slower this time. It's not just a lockout. It's systemic. The trust kernel's enforcing it across all privileged layers. Translation. Even if they restarted every server and danced naked around a bonfire of compliance binders, they still wouldn't get access back. You built this? She asked, not accusing, genuinely asking. I nodded once. 8 years ago, with Nicholas, after the Chicago breach. That name hit the air like smoke. Everyone in governance remembered the Chicago breach. Back then, a junior OPS director had leaked internal credentials trying to impress an external vendor. It cost us 3 contracts and 2 quarters of investor confidence. Nicholas called me into his office the morning after and said, "Make sure this never happens again." So I did. The custodian hold wasn't just a trap door. It was a constitutional clause buried in the company's operational DNA, fused into the trust kernel, hard-coded with safeguards, untouched by version updates, and immune to dashboard styling. It required 2 keys to reverse, the board's digital quorum signature and mine. Until both were turned at the same time, the system wouldn't trust anybody. And that's exactly what it was doing now, locking down, waiting, observing. In the meantime, every access attempt, every failed credential, every denied privilege escalation, every unauthorized dashboard call was being logged, and logged, and logged. At 10:04, Damien's name appeared for the 17th time on the unauthorized access queue. By 10:31, it had hit 38. By 11:12, 73. Each attempt was time-stamped, geotagged, and auto-flagged under high-risk escalation behavior. And where were those logs going? To the holding server I'd built off-site, tucked behind a chain of secure tunnels, legally registered to Mariner Frameworks, my independent compliance consultancy, the firm no one asked about, the firm whose address Damien once mocked in a meeting as her paranoid side hustle. Now it was the only thing feeding clean audit trails into the regulatory record. Immutable, time-stamped, mirrored hourly. I didn't speak much that day, but I watched as they scrambled. Tessa coordinating with legal, the sysadmin team trying to open sandboxed replicas to verify the scope of the lockdown, an intern printing out a copy of the original infrastructure charter from 2015, pages flapping in his nervous hands like a white flag. Every few minutes, Damien would try again, another access attempt, another failure. He started blaming the consultants, blamed IT, blamed me. He even raised his voice at Tessa once. She didn't flinch, but she did stop trying to help after that. By 1 p.m., it was clear that nothing inside the building could undo the hold. The only path forward was board involvement, and a very expensive call to someone who had no reason to answer quickly. Me. I stood up once, to stretch, and walked past Damien, who was on his 6th espresso and 2nd panic-induced rant. "You planned this," he said, eyes wide and dark. "You knew exactly what you were doing." "Of course I did," I said quietly. "That's why it worked." He sputtered. "This is sabotage." "No," I said, pausing just long enough to let it land. "This is protection." And the system agreed, because while Damien ran around barking orders, the only credential it still trusted was mine. At 3:58 p.m., Damien adjusted his collar for the 3rd time in as many minutes, pacing outside the investor conference suite like a man waiting for execution, or worse, a Q&A. He was supposed to be inside already. Lights cued. Welcome slide glowing. A room full of venture partners waiting to be sold a vision of Q1 like nothing had ever happened. Digital vertical expansion, AI-assisted policy layers, zero-drag stakeholder sync, all the jargon he'd cribbed from other people's slides and reshuffled into a branded hallucination. He had the outfit, the walk, the lanyard. What he didn't have was access. He tapped his tablet again. Same result. Login failed. Quorum invalid. Custodian credential unresolved. He tried from the wall terminal, then a fresh company laptop, even a backup hotspot, as if the Wi-Fi was to blame for his unraveling. Nothing. The Quorum node couldn't validate his authority because the core system still recognized one active custodian. Me. Down the hall, a junior compliance officer attempted a soft override, her hands shaking just enough to misspell her own admin hash. Twice. Back in the operations suite, IT had tried every trick in the book. Pseudo fallbacks, ghost instance elevation, legacy port emulation. But the custodian hold had no backdoor. By design, the root framework ran on trust logic, not just permission layers. And the trust logic required a signal from two places, the board and the one person listed in the custodian record. Until both credentials turned simultaneously, every attempt to elevate authority beyond basic read-only access triggered a null response. Damien didn't understand why, he just knew it was happening. By 4:12 p.m., legal showed up, 3 of them, all talking over each other. Can she do this? Is this enforceable? Who approved this clause? Tessa didn't answer. She was too busy skimming the incident report I'd filed that morning. 39 pages. Titled, Unlawful Attempted Custodian Transition Without Board Ratification. Violation of Operational Charter Section 12 and Clause 18C. Escalation initiated. The letterhead? Mariner Frameworks. My LLC. By 4:17, I had already submitted the report to every sitting board member. Each copy came with an attached audit log, cross-referenced access records, and my annotated timeline of procedural violations. Every timestamp, every failed override, every name that tried and failed to impersonate authority. I wasn't making noise. I was leaving footprints. Damien, meanwhile, was on the verge of combustion. He pulled his phone from his pocket and hit redial for the 5th time that hour. Nicholas, pick up, pick up. Nothing. Nicholas was still in the air, flying back from Zurich, ironically, from a regulatory summit where he'd proudly mentioned Solix's new resilience framework. I'd designed that too. Damien paced again, muttering about opportunity cost and hostile tech culture. Said I was vindictive, said I was staging a coup, said I was deliberately obstructing corporate messaging. I wasn't. I'd simply turned on the system's immune response. The Quorum validation engine, which was supposed to authenticate Damien's presentation credentials before launching the investor portal, refused to proceed, because Quorum couldn't be confirmed, because Quorum requires trust, and the system no longer trusted him. Investors waited, then fidgeted, then began quietly asking questions. Why wasn't the roadmap deck live? Why hadn't credentials been pre-cleared? Why were they hearing about a systems freeze from external Slack leaks before internal channels? At 4:29, someone from the board replied to my LLC submission with a one-line message. Please confirm your availability for a compliance review panel tomorrow, 8 a.m. No, hello. No, thank you. Just the tone you use when you realize the only person who understood your infrastructure has suddenly become your most important external consultant. I confirmed, politely, professionally, then watched as the investor session was quietly postponed due to technical delays. No roadmap, no deck, no Damien. Just a room full of people looking at their watches, wondering who the hell was actually in charge. And behind every locked terminal, every null login, every frozen credential request was my name. Still active, still trusted, still sitting in the heart of the system Damien thought he owned. Nicholas arrived Friday morning with the look of a man who'd already made peace with whatever storm he was about to walk into. He didn't greet anyone, didn't look for Damien, didn't ask for a debrief. He went straight into the boardroom, closed the door, and called for legal, compliance, and, unmistakably, me. I walked in wearing the same neutral gray jacket I'd worn for 3 years of board reviews. Same shoes, same plain black notebook. But this time, no one looked through me. They looked to me. Nicholas had a printed copy of the Clause 18C filing in front of him. My LLC's letterhead at the top, signature at the bottom, exhibits neatly tabbed. The board packet had grown to 68 pages overnight, cross-indexed with time-stamped violations, credential escalation attempts, failed override logs, and the contractual links between Solix's trust kernel and its operational charter. He tapped the page without looking up. "This," he said, "is going to be a problem for us." He meant the clause, the hold, the audit trail, the wall we'd hit, but what he really meant was Damien. Clause 18C wasn't just a systems safeguard, it had teeth, because the same document that defined Solix's core trust infrastructure also embedded fiduciary continuity terms. That meant if the custodian role was bypassed without board quorum, it didn't just trip a firewall, it triggered legal exposure. And Damien, in his rush to play king of the dashboard, had tripped every wire on the way in. Worse, his promotion hadn't even been ratified. Nicholas had handed him the title in a holiday rush, assuming rubber stamp approval would follow in January. It hadn't, which meant legally, Damien had never held authority. Every action he took sat in gray space, vulnerable to scrutiny, and if we didn't address it properly, fast, we'd be staring down a regulatory barrel. This, Nicholas repeated, thumbing through the packet, could flag fiduciary misrepresentation, possibly even false filings. I didn't reply. I let the clause speak for itself. It always had. He finally looked up, the weariness showing now. What would it take to fix this? I opened my notebook, slid a single-page proposal forward. Remediation estimate, $8.2 million. The number wasn't negotiable. The work included full revalidation of the trust layer, rollback of all unauthorized system changes, restoration of pre-holiday credential integrity, and external certification of systems continuity. It also included something else, a binding litigation waiver, one that protected Solix from future claims tied to Damien's tampering, assuming they accepted full liability now and executed a systems restoration under my direction. Nicholas scanned it, didn't argue, just nodded once and said, "We'll move forward." There was no talk of bonuses, no corporate pride, just a quiet admission that they'd played with something they didn't understand, and lost. By noon, the legal team was drafting Damien's exit terms. The board met privately to vote. It was unanimous. His authority, nullified. His title, revoked. His access, already locked. His exit, framed as an alignment of leadership priorities. No public mention of the breach, no apology, just a quiet purge of a man who flew too close to the root node and got burned by code he never respected. They never asked me to come back. They didn't need to. I already had everything I needed. My LLC retainer, the clause, the logs, and the one thing no flashy promotion or bomber jacket could replace. The system still trusted me, and for $8.2 million, it would keep doing so. By Monday morning, Damien had disappeared like a misplaced comma. No goodbye email, no exit interview, no final Slack status, just a bounced message. User not found. His badge credentials were wiped from the security matrix before sunrise, his profile archived, his calendar empty. The office admin quietly unassigned his parking spot. His Solix bomber jacket was left hanging behind his office door, still zipped, still smug. The official announcement hit inboxes at 9:07 a.m., subject line, Strategic Leadership Realignment. No context. No name. No, just the usual corporate smoothie of words. Forward-focused recalibration, leveraging continuity partners, realigning towards scalable governance. The kind of language that buries a body without ever admitting there was a funeral. No one asked questions out loud, but the silence was tight. And outside that carefully controlled comms blast, the internet did what it always does. It noticed. 2 investor blogs posted side-by-side screenshots. One of Damien's big debut photo in December, standing in front of a Solix-branded screen, and one of the Monday org chart, his name scrubbed like it had never existed. Caption, he lasted 1 quarter. The systems he tried to replace outlasted him. Another headline read, don't delete the person who built your skeleton, especially if the skeleton fights back. I didn't post anything. Didn't comment. didn't like or retweet or weigh in. I had no need to. Because while Damien's office chair sat cold and unclaimed, my name quietly appeared in a more important place. A standing compliance contract issued from Solix to Mariner Frameworks, my LLC, the same framework they once ignored, now institutionalized. They didn't bring me back as staff. That wasn't necessary. I was elevated beyond that now. My role was codified as external custodian of trust architecture, language lifted straight from the original Clause 18C filing. My deliverables? Quarterly verification, regulatory continuity assurance, and secure credential stewardship. I didn't clock in. I didn't badge through reception. But when the system blinked awake every Sunday night to run its core integrity checks, it still waited for one ping, one time-stamped credential. Mine. The week Damien vanished, 3 departments quietly reverted to legacy protocols I'd built. Not because they were told to, because they worked. Because no consultant dashboard ever truly replaced the logic that knew how the company breathed. One junior dev posted anonymously in a staff forum, "We should send thank you cupcakes to whoever made the system stop rejecting root verification loops." Someone replied, "We did. Her LLC now bills us hourly." It wasn't personal. It was structural. The chair at the top of operations, empty again. But the skeleton, the code, the credential trust, the heartbeat of governance still moved. And every time it pulsed, it whispered the same thing Damien never understood. The system doesn't care who wears the jacket. It remembers who built the lock. 3 months later, the panic had faded. The offices were humming again. Conference rooms booked. Glass whiteboards filled with diagrams no one would remember in a week. A new leadership cohort was testing their tone in emails, somewhere between visionary and cautious. The mess had been buried under a dozen strategic recalibrations, and Damien's name had become the kind of thing whispered only in elevator pauses and off-site happy hours. That's when the email came in. Subject: Root Credential Update Request. Urgent. It was from a mid-tier systems manager. Nice enough guy. Smart, curious, newly promoted, trying to clean up inherited workflows before the next audit cycle. He was preparing for a platform demo, wanted to make sure all credential paths were current. His wording was polite. His assumptions were dangerous. I read it twice, then replied with 2 words: "You can't." He responded 10 minutes later, confused. Thought maybe I misunderstood. He attached a diagram of the current governance flow, suggesting we could point the root credential path to a new named executive sponsor. "Just for alignment," he said. "Cleaner audit story." I didn't write back right away. I waited until the system itself could answer for me, because that same night, as it does every quarter, the board's quorum validation cycle initiated, a silent process. No fanfare. Just a blink, one green light in a row of checks buried deep inside the trust kernel, one light tied to a protocol written nearly a decade ago, and a single credential, mine. That validation doesn't use passwords. It doesn't care about job titles, departments, or how many slide decks someone has made. It runs on one thing, a biometric anchor embedded in a line of code. Mine. A fingerprint pressed once. Years ago, during an integrity signing ceremony, Nicholas himself had ordered after a near breach forced us to rebuild half the stack. That fingerprint is hashed into the kernel and lives in the same buried segment of architecture Damien never thought to ask about. And it does exactly one thing. Every 90 days, it verifies that the custodian still exists, that she's still trusted, still watching, still here. The system doesn't announce it. There's no alert. No email, just a green light, and if that light ever turns red, if the credential ever fails to validate, the protocol triggers a silent escalation that disables quorum-based authority until a board-reviewed replacement is installed through physical multi-party attestation. No one's ever reached that step, because the light keeps blinking green. That night, after the cycle passed, I forwarded the systems manager a snippet of the clause annotated in plain English. The root credential path is non-transferable, non-editable, and permanently bound to the original custodian credential issued under Clause 18C, Solix Charter. Then I added a note. It's not outdated. It's protective. You don't change the lock when the house is still safe. He never asked again. But 2 weeks later, someone in legal messaged me quietly, asked if I'd consider updating the explanatory document for the trust kernel for future transitions. I declined, because there would be no transition, not without the board, not without me. Not without rewriting the entire system from scratch, and even then, they'd have to pry the old structure out piece by piece, every clause bound to operational memory like rings in a tree trunk. So I let the light blink. Green, always green. And every time it does, it says what no announcement, no new VP, no consultant ever could. You built this. They just rent it.